Take your Bibles tonight and let's turn to the Old Testament, to the minor prophets. And we're going to look at a minor prophet that has a particular distinction among the Old Testament books. There are 3 New Testament books that hold that distinction over there. What distinction would that be? Anybody have a clue? That's not much of a clue. There are 3 books of the New Testament that are only 1 chapter long. 2nd John, 3rd John, and Jude. There's only 1 book in the Old Testament that has that distinction of only having 1 chapter. That is the book of Obadiah. So let's turn to the book of Obadiah. If you're like me and Linda Stone, she starts back at Genesis. And she said, by the time she gets to some of those later books, the passage is read and gone. I told a story this morning. Maybe I don't think I told it here. When I was a senior in college, preparing for the ministry, a senior at a Christian college, a professor had the audacity to make us memorize the books of the Bible. Can you imagine that? But you know what? Nobody had ever made me do that before. Nobody, I don't know Sunday school class nowadays in your Sunday school. I'm sure they did it back then too, but they'll learn little jingles and they'll memorize all the books of the Bible, a song and whatnot. But I'd never done that. Now, by the time I was a senior in college, I knew all of my Old Testament books and all my New Testament books with the exception of the minor prophets. And so I had to work on those last 12 books of the Old Testament. And I remember OAJ. And the other way, and I memorized them. So if somebody calls for a turn to an Old Testament minor prophet book, I start Hosea, Joel, and so and till I find it. I'm not sure how you do it. Maybe you look at the index or just keep turning pages till you get to it. But if you turn 2 pages at one time, you're going to miss Obadiah. So let's go to Obadiah. Chapter number, there's only 1 chapter. I just told you that. Obadiah. We call these the minor prophets in contradistinction to the major prophets. The major prophets are a little bit longer typically. Isaiah's long, Jeremiah's long, Ezekiel's long, Daniel's only 12 chapters. Lamentations is just a few chapters. We've seen a couple of longer books here. We did Amos last week, which is 9 chapters. But Obadiah is just the one. But just because it's minor doesn't mean there isn't something good in it. If it wasn't something good in it, it would be there. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, and so forth. And we believe that God in His providence oversaw the collection of books to go in the Bible. And we believe our collection of 66 books is God ordained, and God did this. God put it together. And Obadiah is one of those books. So we're going to look at it. The name Obadiah, we don't know anything about him. There are 12 other people in the Bible named Obadiah. And this makes the 13th. But we do not know anything about Obadiah as far as who he was. All that we know is the fact that his name means servant of the Lord. And that's a pretty good way to be remembered. I think about James, the author of the little book of James. James was the Lord's half-brother. And you'd have thought perhaps he may have identified himself as James, the Lord's half-brother. No, he didn't. He said, James, the servant of the Lord. Listen, one of the greatest things that we could ever be known by is the fact that we are a servant of God. Listen, Jesus said, he that's least in the kingdom is greater than John the Baptist. Jesus is none greater than John the Baptist. He said, he that's least in the kingdom is greater than that. And so, if you're a servant of the Lord, you've got some good credentials. And Obadiah, if his name means anything, and more likely than not it does, because they named people for very specific reasons back in the day, and he's a servant of the Lord. Obadiah, if you look at verse number 1, it says, the vision of Obadiah. Thus saith the Lord God concerning Edom. This one little chapter book, 21 verses, is about Edom. Now we remember Edom, I think. Edom is another name for Esau. And we remember the story of Jacob and Esau, don't we? I don't think we'll take the time to go back there, but in Genesis chapter 25, Esau is born. Remember, there's two twins. And Jacob comes out holding on to the heel of his brother. You remember? And Jacob means supplanter. Esau was the firstborn. And being the firstborn in that culture meant an awful lot. But even as things unfold very quickly there in the story of Jacob and Esau, in chapter number 25, the latter part of the chapter, Esau is about to die of hunger, so he thinks. And so what does he do? He sells his birthright for a mess of pottage. Listen, many sermons have been preached on that notion. Selling your birthright for a mess of pottage. How many people give up one of the most important things in all of their lives for a bowl of porridge, a bowl of beans, a bowl of lentils, whatever the pottage was? Some little bowl of soup, a bowl of stew. And he gave up his birthright for a mess of pottage. Later on, Jacob, whose name means supplanter, he's the one who undercuts and so forth and deceives. And Jacob, at the bidding of his mother, really, steals the blessing from his older brother. Remember the story of going out hunting and so forth? He comes back, puts the wool on, and his father thinks he's Esau when he's Jacob, and he gives him the birthright. And I always thought somehow that should have been some kind of steal. But he couldn't get out of it. He stole the blessing. And Esau is pretty upset. So, of course, Jacob flees until his brother's anger cools down. And eventually, Esau becomes known as Edom. Jacob comes back after the 14 years serving, or 21 years serving, and they meet, and they're on pretty good terms. Jacob sends along a bunch of presents to soften up Esau, who he feels like he's probably still going to be pretty angry about what's happened. In Genesis 32 and 33. But Esau is happy, he's content, he's prosperous, but they part as friends. In Genesis 36, we see the generations of Esau. In Genesis 36:1, we learn Esau, who is Edom. They wind up settling in the area just south of Israel, south of the Dead Sea. And their territory is south of the Dead Sea, all down to the Red Sea, a pretty big area. That's where they settled. And it becomes known, the nation's called Edom. They settle around a place called Mount Seir, and they become the Edomites. By the time Moses leads the children of Israel out of Egyptian bondage, it's time for them to go to the Promised Land. Moses contacts the Edomites and says, "Can we pass through your land? We won't disturb anything, won't stop. If we take anything, we'll pay you for it. We'll stay on the King's Highway. By the way, those on the caravan route, and we'll stay on the King's Highway. But Edomites refused to let the children of Israel pass through their land. And we see animosity. We see division. We see hostility. And that continued for the remainder of their history. By this time we see King Saul and King David, they're fighting with the Edomites. David winds up conquering them and subduing them, and they become kind of tributaries to the nation of Israel. As time goes along, we come to Jehoshaphat, and we at least know the name of Jehoshaphat. He and Ahab kind of got hooked up together, and that mess ensued. But Jehoshaphat has a son named Jehoram. And under his reign, the Edomites rebel. And there's conflict there. Most Bible commentators put Obadiah about that time. It's roughly the same time as Joel, the 840s BC. Not that that's all that crucial to understanding the message here. But it's this time of rebellion, and Edom is not friendly towards his brother. The Jews, they're brothers. They're kinfolk. They're the same family. But there's hostility. That continues. They become known later on as the Idumeans. And the Romans conquered the area. Julius Caesar, whose name we know, takes the governor of Idumea and appoints him as the procurator of Judea. His name is Antipater. He has a son whose name was Herod the Great. Herod the Great is the procurator of Judea during the time when who was born? Jesus. It was Herod the Great who killed all the babies. Later on, it was his son, Herod Antipas, who killed John the Baptist, again in Idumea. Later on, it was his son, Herod Agrippa I, who killed James, the brother of John, and put Peter in prison. He was going to kill him, but God intervened there. It was his son that Paul appeared before Agrippa in the latter chapters of Acts. So we see the Idumeans and the Edomites all through the Scriptures. And again, this is family, but there's this hostility, this animosity, and this is what Obadiah is about. When the Jews revolted against the Romans in 70 A.D., the Romans came and crushed that revolt, destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed Herod's temple, and the Idumeans as a people kind of just disappear from history. And I'm sure there are descendants, but they're not identified by this name anymore. So we see Jacob and Esau. Esau becomes Edom. And we see at first there's a pretty good relationship after they've been parted for a while, those years. But then it turns sour when Moses comes through. It was sour ever after. Let's see what Obadiah is about. There's three parts to this book. And by the way, the name Edom means red. And people wonder, speculate as to why perhaps his name was changed from Esau to Edom. This is interesting. The pottage was red. The red pottage. The name Esau, when Esau was born, he was red, if you remember. He was red, of a ruddy complexion. Maybe that's why his name was changed to Edom. Or perhaps it's where he lived. He lived in the cliffs, and that area south of the Dead Sea is rich in copper and iron ore, and the cliffs are red, and it's a pretty amazing place, and I'll mention that here coming up very shortly. But maybe that's why they called him Edom. But they became the Edomites, which means red. The book of Obadiah is divided into three parts. The first part is prophecies of destruction. The Edomites, and if you remember, I think this is an important thing to remember. Of course, they're family, and there's hostility. But God also promised Abraham, those who bless you, I will bless, and those who curse you, I will curse. And the Edomites did not bless the Israelites, did not bless their brother, did not bless them, but rather cursed them and did some other things that we'll see here in the course of this little book. But we see in verse number 1, concerning Edom, we have heard a rumor. And this is not a rumor in the sense that it could be true, might not be true. This just means we've heard there's an announcement from the Lord. We've heard an announcement from the Lord, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. This announcement going out to all the heathen nations, and here's what the announcement is. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle. God's calling all the nations against Edom to fight against her. In other words, God's got a bone to pick with Edom, with the Edomites. Got a bone to pick with them. This nation has not done right, and God's calling all the nations to come against her. This is a prophecy, the first 9 verses of the destruction that's coming. Behold, I have made thee small among the heathen. Edom was not big, never a powerful nation, never real mighty, never a rural rule. They were small. They were small among the heathen, but they were greatly despised. God, the way the Edomites treated the Israelites, we could maybe use the expression, it rubbed God the wrong way. Listen, when you cross the Lord, you're on the wrong side. And when you mistreat the Israelites, you're on the wrong side. And this is what the Edomites had done. And they were greatly despised. Verse number 3 is a verse that gets to the heart of the matter. And this is something that we can apply to our lives without any question. The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee. Edom's great sin, if you will, was the sin of pride. 6 things that the Lord hates, yea, 7 are an abomination. What's number 1 on that list? A proud look. A proud look. Pride is a sin that leads to destruction. And Edom, though she was small, she was puffed up and proud. And any time anybody goes against the Lord, that's an indication of what? Pride. Listen, people go up their back and say, I'm doing it my way. I ain't doing it. I'm not doing it God's way. I'm doing it my way. What is that? That's pride. I know a better way. I'm not doing that. I'm going to be my boss. You've heard people say, I'd rather be my own boss, get die and go to hell than go to heaven and be somebody's servant. Listen, that's the wrong way to think. That's a tragic way to think. That's a line of thinking that leads straight to destruction. And this was Edom's problem, the pride of thy heart. Now here's the thing. Thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock. The land of Edom was a mountainous land. Its mountains range from 5,000 to nearly 6,000 feet above sea level. And if you'll think about the Dead Sea, it's about 1,300 feet below sea level. I mean, there are mountains there. And how many of you have heard of the city of Petra? You've heard of the city of Petra. All right? You ought to go Google the city of Petra and look at some pictures. This is in the heart of Edom. In fact, this is the Edomites, that area was kind of overrun by a group of people called the Nabateans. And I think they kind of assimilated into that group. But that's where there was a major city there. They said that perhaps 20,000 people lived there at one time. And it's a city in the cliffs. And it's in the mountains. The only way into that area was through a 1 mile long crevice up in there. It's beautiful in its own way. The layers of the rocks, and you go through there. Somebody said that because of that narrow entrance into this city, that 12 men could hold off an entire army because they got to go through that little narrow passageway. But they lived in the rocks. In fact, there were caves all in those hills, all in those mountains. Back in there, one of the most famous pictures of Petra is the picture of the treasury, where they carved it out of the sandstone, beautiful red sandstone, beautiful. They carved this beautiful front and in a room way back on the inside. That was their treasury. There was a Roman amphitheater there, and there are caves all on the sides of the hills there. This is where they lived. Thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock. By the way, Hebrew for rock is Selah, S-E-L-A. And this city is mentioned in a couple of places in the Bible. It's mentioned in Isaiah 16:1. It's mentioned in 2 Kings 14:7. Now we call that city, which is no longer inhabited, we call it the city of what? Petra. And Petra is Greek for what? For rock. So it has the same name, just a different language. But this was one of their major cities in these hills in the mountains. And they were proud because they lived in this impenetrable city, fortress, in the high places, the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? Though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence I will bring thee down, saith the Lord. This kind of points to the omnipresence of God. They thought they were safe, tucked up in that mountain and through that narrow passageway. They thought they were safe. They thought they were hidden from anything God would want to do to them. Let me tell you something. No matter where you are, God knows where you're at. He knows how to get there. You cannot hide from the Lord. They couldn't hide from God. And they thought they were set, fixed, and nobody could bring them down. Well, that's the furthest thing from the truth. Look at verse 5. This verse tells about the extent of the destruction that God was predicting to come upon these Edomites. He said, if thieves come to thee, if robbers by night, how art thou cut off? Would they not have stolen till they had enough? If the grape gatherers came to thee, would they not leave some grapes? Listen, a thief, he may try to get it all, but if he's in a rush, he's going to wind up leaving something behind. He's got his arms full, he's going to leave something behind. The one who's gathering grapes, he's going to miss a few grapes. But God says, I'm not going to leave anything. I'm not going to miss anything. Your destruction is going to be complete. I'm going to destroy you and leave nothing. Very reminiscent of what God did with Sodom and Gomorrah. He wiped them off the map. And the Edomites eventually are no more. God's omnipresence would find them and destroy them. God's omniscience knows all about them. Look at verse number 6. How are the things of Esau searched out? How are his hidden things sought up? God knows all about it. He's not only omnipresent, he's omniscient. All the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. In other words, Edom thought all of his relationships with foreign entities, foreign nations, all their treaties and all their diplomacy, they thought they would be safe. How many times have nations signed treaties and it turns out the one they signed the treaty with is the one that turns on them and is part of their destruction? And the Edomites, listen, you better put your trust in the Lord. Thou not in alliances with other nations. I think of the verse in Proverbs. The horse is prepared for battle, but safety is of the Lord. Listen, as you look through history, particularly Bible history, in the history of Israel, there were times when they turned to trust other nations, which was a drastic mistake, when they needed to just trust the Lord. Edom's confederacy, her association with other nations, was not going to be enough to save her. Verse 8, shall I not in that day, saith the Lord, even destroy the wise men out of Edom, and understanding out of the mount of Esau? The Edomites were known for their wise men. Very interesting. If you'll go all the way back to the book of Job, one of Job's friends was Eliphaz the Temanite. Teman was one of the cities in Edom. And Eliphaz is a friend of Job. Maybe this points to one of their wise men. They were known for their wisdom. But you remember, the wisdom of men is what? Doesn't go very far with the Lord. Doesn't go very far. Thy mighty men, O Teman, shall be dismayed, to the end that every one the mount of Esau may be cut off by slaughter. This is the prophecy of their utter destruction. Even though they were proud, they thought they were safe, they had all these alliances, they had their wise men. Listen, when God's got your number, He's got it. And there's nothing can spare you except your repentance and His mercy. Verses 10 to 14 explain why God was going to destroy the Edomites. There's the predictions, the prophecies of their destruction. Now God says, this is why. This is what you've done. Verse number 10. For thy violence against thy brother Jacob. And they were brothers. They were twins. Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. Violence against thy brother. Verse 11. In the day that thou stoodest on the other side, in the day that the strangers carried away captive his forces, and foreigners entered into his gates, and cast lots upon Jerusalem, even thou wast as one of them. Most people believe that the Obadiah lived during that time when the Edomites rebelled against Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat. But they think that the prophet sees in the future to the Babylonians coming and destroying Jerusalem, and the Edomites standing by and participating in it. And you know what Nebuchadnezzar did? He came, burned Solomon's temple, destroyed it, took away captives, left only the unskilled people behind, and it was terrible devastation. And most of the scholars believe that the Edomites were there watching this, rooting them on, and we'll see some things here in just a moment or two, and like say, sick to be a bulldog. Go, Babylon, go. You know, we hate those people. Go get them. And again, they're on the wrong side. And as these things were happening, it was as though they were one of them. Look at verses 12 to 14. You'll see this phrase over and over again. Thou shouldest not have done this. And there's a list of about 8 things here. Thou shouldest not have looked on the day of thy brother, in the day that he became a stranger. And again, it's as though it has already happened, but again, most scholars think it's prophetic of what they were going to do when the Babylonians would come. And even as they think about that time of destruction, even further down the road, there are prophecies here about the nations gathering against Israel. You should not have looked on her in the day your brother became a stranger. Neither shouldest thou have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction. Listen, you got a brother, and he faces destruction. What should your attitude be about that? You ought to be grieved. You ought to be there to help, not to rejoice over it. Proverbs says, don't rejoice in your enemy's misfortune. I remember when I was way back when, the early 80s, I was actually a basketball coach. And, this was in Westminster in Maryland. And we were playing Frederick Christian School, and Frederick was kind of our arch enemy. And Frederick had a guard. This guy was one of the best players in the league. His name was Joey. I was laughing about it, I remember his first name. It was Joey. Joey was good. And if you're going to beat Frederick, you got to take care of Joey. Well, just before we played them, Joey got hurt. And our guys got all excited. and we played them, and we beat them. But we beat them without Joey. And I got all of those boys. I said, are you really glad that Joey got hurt? Are you really glad that you beat a team that was missing one of their key players? Where's the joy in that? Is that what you want to do? And I just try. We don't rejoice in the misfortune of even our enemies. We weren't enemies, just rivals. It's not quite the same thing, but I was trying to teach them a lesson. But the Edomites, man, they were jumping for joy, clapping and cheering, because the Jews are going down. Israel's going down. No, we don't do that. They did it. It says, continuing in verse 12, neither shouldest thou have spoken proudly in the day of distress. Oh, they got what they deserved. And again, there's this pride, a pride in that heart. Verse 13, thou shouldest not have entered into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. It's like they participated in this. And as the gates were coming down, the city was left defenseless, they went in and took advantage of their brother. Nor have laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. Now here's even a worse part. Verse 14, neither shouldest thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those of his that did escape. In other words, as the Babylonians are coming, the people are trying to escape, and they cut off their escape route to make sure they would face the sword of Nebuchadnezzar. Neither shouldest thou have delivered up those of his that did remain in the day of distress. They turned over. Perhaps those who were in hiding and just trying to save their lives. They had most certainly mistreated their brother. Now, the last few verses, 15 to 21, we come to a prophecy about the day of the Lord. We've already seen this. We saw it in Amos. We saw it particularly in the book of Joel. The day of the Lord, again, it's a major Bible theme of prophecy, the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is a time of God's judgment, destruction, and exerting His regality over a people, and ultimately it will be fulfilled when the tribulation period and the return of Christ and the millennium. That's the ultimate day of the Lord, and I think this is in view here. Look at verse 15. This is the third part of this little book. The day of the Lord. For the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen. It's not just the Edomites who are going to face the wrath of God. All the heathen nations will face the wrath of God that are not right with the Lord. As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. There's a law. There's a universal spiritual law. It's called the law of sowing and reaping. It's a physical law. You put a kernel of corn in the ground, what are you going to get out of it? If it germinates and sprouts up, you'll get cornstalk. You're not going to get cucumbers or peppers. You're going to get corn. You put an apple seed in the ground, you're not going to get a peach tree or an orange tree. You're going to get an apple tree. What you sow, you reap. These people had sown destruction, they were going to reap destruction. Not just the Edomites, but all the heathen nations that did it. As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thine own head. Verse 16. For as ye have drunk upon my holy mountain, so shall all the heathen drink continually. Yea, they shall drink, they shall swallow down, and they shall be as though they had not been. Now, there's some imagery here. They had drunk, they had participated, they had partaken of the land of Israel. They had imbibed the substance and the destruction of their brother. They had participated in that. It says, now you're going to drink. You drank of that cup, now you're going to drink of another cup. And that cup is the cup of God's fury and God's wrath. Let me just give you this reference. Go over to Jeremiah. We're on time. We're going to finish very short. Go over to Jeremiah chapter 25 if you're interested in this. And read from verses 15, really on down to the end of the chapter. And you'll see where Jeremiah talks about the same thing, drinking the cup of God's wrath. And when you get to Revelation, you see the same thing. They're going to drink of the cup of God's fury. The heathen nations, the unsaved nations. Verse 17. The heathen are going to drink, but upon Mount Zion shall be deliverance. The Edomites turned against their own brother, but God is going to deliver the Jews. There shall be holiness, and the house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. The house of Jacob shall be a fire, the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble. So we had a fire the other night at the house. Everybody came over and we roasted hot dogs and all this, and the guy we bought the house from had left some scrap kindling underneath of our sun porch. It was just as dry as it could be. and it only took a little help to get that fire going. You know what? Stubble, old dry stubble, a lot of mass to it. It's going to what? It's just going to go up. And these heathen nations, the house of Esau, Joseph's the flame, Jacob's the fire, Esau's the stubble. They shall kindle them and devour them, and there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau. And they of the south shall possess the mount of Esau. They of the plain of the Philistines. They shall possess the fields of Ephraim, the fields of Samaria and Benjamin, possess Gilead. And the captivity of this host of the children of Israel shall possess that of the Canaanites, that's the heathen, all that area, even to Zarephath, the captivity of Jerusalem, which is in Sepharad, shall possess the cities of the south. And notice verse 20, and Savior shall come up on Mount Zion, the judge of the mount of Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. Listen, when Jesus comes back to reign, he's going to have helpers, right? He's going to have people ruling and reigning with him, and these saviors, these rulers with him will rule over the mount of Esau. One of these days, I mentioned this morning, one of these days, King Jesus is coming back. And the kingdom of the world will not be Washington, D.C. It won't be London. It won't be Moscow. It won't be Beijing. He's named some of the other great cities of the world. Jerusalem. Jerusalem. And from that city, Jesus will rule. He'll have his governors and whatnot all over the planet ruling. That will include Mount Esau. Obadiah's little book, but tells of the coming destruction and the why in the future. When a brother turned against a brother, that brother was the one who carried the promises that God made to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. And he said, if you bless me, I'll bless you. If you bless him, I'll bless you. If you curse them, I'll curse you. And Edom turned against his own brother. Again, Jacob did some things, but that was kind of all ordained by the Lord. And there's a plan here. And Jesus one day will rule upon his throne in Jerusalem. His power is together. We can learn some things from this little book. For one thing, we can learn about the dangers of pride. We can learn about the dangers of being violent against our brother. How many brothers don't speak to each other? How many brothers are mean to each other? How many Christians mistreat each other? We can learn about rejoicing over other people's misfortune. That's petty and small and evil. Don't do that. Let's remember what God's plan is for the heathen. Those who rebel against God and refuse to bow to his authority and his lordship. Let's remember what God's plan is for Israel. Israel is the everlasting nation. One day Jesus will rule this earth from his throne in Jerusalem. Father, bless these words of this little minor prophet, one chapter, 21 verses. Again, there's some great lessons here for us. It helps us to learn something. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.